Imagine living in a country where telling the truth can put you in prison, where a soldier can be ordered to silence his own people, where a grieving family can't even mourn their dead in peace, and where the people closest to the ruler may be the very people preparing to betray him. This is Kafira, a country ruled by fear. What happens to a country when nobody trusts anyone anymore? If a government teaches its people to survive through betrayal, can anyone still be trusted to save the country? A country where everyone is betraying everyone, the citizens are betrayed by their government. Friends betray friends. Officials betray their colleagues. People betray their principles. And eventually, even the people who appear loyal to the regime turn against each other. And in Francis Imbuga's Betrayal in the City, the most dangerous question isn't, who is the villain? It's this, who can you trust when everyone is trying to survive? Because in Kafira, betrayal isn't an exception. It's becoming a way of life. At first glance, Kafira appears to have everything a functioning country should have. A government, a president, soldiers, police, universities, courts, rules. But underneath the appearance of order, something is deeply broken. The government doesn't simply control the people. It controls what they can say, what they can do, and, increasingly, what they are allowed to remember. At the center of this system is Boss, the country's powerful ruler. And Boss has learned one of the oldest lessons of political power. You don't necessarily need everyone to love you. You only need them to be afraid of you. Then a young university student named Adika is killed. And suddenly, the political crisis becomes personal. Adika isn't just a name in a newspaper. He's someone's son, someone's brother, someone who had a future. His death leaves his parents, Dolga and Nina, devastated. But their grief creates another problem. They want to mourn their son. The authorities want control. Even death is no longer private. Dolga and Nina are preparing to perform the traditional rituals for their dead son. But the authorities interfere. Think about what that means. The government isn't simply controlling political speech. It is entering the most intimate part of human life, the way people bury their dead. And that's where Imbuga's world becomes frightening. Because when a government can tell you how to mourn, there's almost nothing left that belongs entirely to you. And then we meet Jusper. Jusper is young, angry, grieving, and deeply affected by what has happened. But there is something unsettling about him. He doesn't respond to the situation in the way people expect. His behavior makes others question his state of mind. Is he unstable? Is he dangerous, or is he simply reacting rationally to an irrational world? That's the question we should keep in mind. Because Jusper isn't just mourning his brother. He's beginning to understand what Kafira really is. A place where ordinary people have very little power, and where anger can become dangerous. At this point, it would be easy to think the story is simply people versus government. But Imbuga gives us something more complicated. Because not everyone inside the system is completely loyal to it. And not everyone fighting the system is completely innocent. Some people resist. Some cooperate. Some remain silent. And some change sides whenever it benefits them. That's where the title becomes important. Betrayal in the City. Not betrayal by one person. Betrayal everywhere. One of the people caught inside this system is Jere. Jere is a soldier. His job is to obey orders. But what happens when the order itself is wrong? What happens when the government tells you to enforce something your conscience rejects? And what happens when obeying the system means betraying the people you're supposed to protect? Jere is about to face exactly that choice. And his decision will show us something important. Authoritarian systems don't survive through one person's power. They survive because ordinary people are pressured into helping maintain them. But Jere isn't the only person caught in this machinery. There is another man, Mosese, a former government insider who has fallen out of favor. A man who knows how the system works from the inside. And now, he's in prison. Why? Because in Kafira, knowing too much can be almost as dangerous as speaking the truth. And when Jusper eventually encounters Mosese, their meeting will change the direction of the story. Because the question is no longer simply, what has the government done? The question becomes, what are these people willing to do to fight back? And somewhere inside Kafira, a plan is beginning to take shape. A plan involving prisoners, soldiers, politicians, and eventually, the ruler himself. But the most dangerous person in this story may not be the person sitting at the top. It may be the person nobody suspects. The perfect survivor. His name is Mulili. And before this story is over, someone is going to betray someone. The only question is, who betrays whom first? To understand why Kafira is so dangerous, we need to meet the people trapped inside its machinery. First, there's Mosese. He knows the system from the inside. He has seen how power works. And now he's in prison. But Mosese isn't simply a political prisoner. He's a warning. Because Kafira has a rule that everyone eventually learns. You are safe only while you remain useful. The moment you become inconvenient, the system can turn against you. Jusper's encounter with Mosese becomes important because the two men represent different responses to oppression. Jusper is young, angry, impatient. He wants action. Mosese is more cautious. He understands that anger alone isn't enough to defeat a powerful system. And this creates a tension between them. Should you fight immediately? Or wait for the right moment? Because in Kafira, the wrong move can cost you everything. Then there's Jere. He's a soldier. And unlike the people at the top of the government, Jere isn't protected by political power. He's expected to obey. That sounds simple, until the orders become impossible to justify. Jere is forced to confront a question that every authoritarian system eventually creates. What happens when following orders makes you part of the injustice? Jere has a uniform, but underneath that uniform, there is still a conscience. And that conscience is becoming a problem. This is something important about Kafira. Boss doesn't personally control everything. He doesn't need to. The system works because people carry out his decisions. Soldiers enforce them. Officials administer them. Citizens learn to stay quiet. And opportunists benefit from them. That's how power becomes durable. Not because one man is everywhere, but because the system has taught everyone what happens when they disobey. Fear does the rest. And then, there's Mulili. At first, he may seem almost ridiculous. He doesn't have the intimidating presence of Boss. He doesn't have Mosese's political understanding. He doesn't seem like the obvious threat. But that's exactly what makes him interesting. Mulili understands something very simple. Power rewards useful people. So he attaches himself to Boss. He gains privileges. He gains protection. He gains access. and he doesn't seem particularly concerned about ideology. His loyalty is practical. As long as the system benefits him, he benefits the system. And this gives us one of the most important questions in the entire play. When someone supports a corrupt system, do they actually believe in it? Or are they simply protecting themselves? Mulili represents the second possibility. He doesn't need to love the government. He only needs to understand how to survive inside it. And that makes him dangerous, because people like Mulili don't necessarily destroy systems from the outside. Sometimes, they destroy them from within. Boss believes his position is secure. He has soldiers. He has authority. He has loyal officials. He has people who depend on him. But there's a problem. The people around him aren't necessarily loyal to Boss. They are loyal to what Boss can give them. And those are two very different things. The moment the rewards disappear, the loyalty can disappear with them. Meanwhile, Jusper's anger continues to grow. His brother is dead. His family has been humiliated. And the government responsible doesn't appear interested in justice. Jusper begins to understand something. The system isn't going to correct itself. Someone has to challenge it. But challenging power creates another problem. How far are you willing to go? Because once you decide that the rules are unjust, you have to decide which rules you're willing to break. This is where the story becomes morally complicated. It's easy to condemn a government that abuses power. But what happens when the people fighting that government begin using deception, manipulation, violence, betrayal? Can you defeat a corrupt system without becoming corrupted by the fight against it? That question follows Jusper, and it follows everyone around him. Something is changing inside Kafira. The prisoners aren't simply waiting. Jusper isn't simply grieving. Jere isn't simply following orders. And Mulili is watching. Everyone is calculating. Everyone is deciding whom they can trust. And somewhere above them all, Boss still believes he controls the country. He doesn't realize how fragile his position really is. Because the most dangerous thing about absolute power is that eventually, the person holding it stops believing anyone could possibly betray them. But betrayal is coming. And it won't begin with a dramatic revolution. It will begin with something much smaller. One person deciding that loyalty is no longer worth the price. Once that happens, the entire structure begins to crack. Because when fear stops working, power has nothing left. And in Kafira, the first person to discover that may be the very man Boss trusts most, Mulili. By now, Kafira's machinery is beginning to crack. But the people inside it aren't simply victims. Some are learning how to use the system for themselves. And one of the most dangerous is Mulili. He doesn't challenge Boss. He doesn't criticize the government. He does something much more useful. He makes himself indispensable. Boss rewards him with land and influence, while Mulili uses his position to protect his own interests. And that is the first great lesson of Kafira. Corrupt systems don't only create victims. They create beneficiaries. Then we meet Kabito. He's involved in the government's entertainment committee. And he has a serious problem with Mulili. The two men clash over power, privilege, and a lucrative milk tender. But Kabito makes a dangerous mistake. He assumes that an argument is just an argument. In Kafira, an argument with the wrong person can become a death sentence. During a break in the committee meeting, Mulili goes to Boss. And what begins as a personal conflict becomes something much darker. Boss orders Mulili to eliminate Kabito. Soon afterward, Kabito is dead, and Mulili returns with a convenient explanation: a road accident. A tragic accident. Nothing more, except it wasn't an accident. This is where the title begins to reveal its full meaning. Kabito isn't an enemy of the government. He's part of it. And yet, the system destroys him anyway. Why? Because authoritarian power eventually becomes paranoid. Everyone becomes a potential threat. Everyone becomes replaceable. And the people closest to power learn an ugly lesson today. You can be the government's favorite. Tomorrow you can be its target. Mulili appears loyal to Boss. But what exactly is he loyal to? The country, the government, Boss, or himself? The answer becomes increasingly obvious. Mulili's loyalty lasts only as long as the system continues rewarding him. And that makes his relationship with Boss extremely fragile. Because when power changes hands, Mulili will have to make a choice. And Mulili has always known how to choose survival. Meanwhile, Jusper is changing too. At the beginning, he looked like a grieving young man consumed by anger. Now, he is becoming something more dangerous. He's learning how the system works. He's learning how people in power think. And most importantly, he's learning that sometimes the most effective way to defeat a system is to make the system destroy itself. That idea will eventually become the foundation of his plan. Jusper gets an unexpected opportunity. The government wants a play performed for an important visiting foreign dignitary. And suddenly, the regime that fears criticism needs art. It needs entertainment. It needs a performance that makes Kafira look stable. So Jusper becomes involved in writing the play. And this is where the story becomes brilliantly ironic. Because Boss believes he's using art to control the image of his country, Jusper realizes art can also expose the truth. The government thinks it's commissioning entertainment. Jusper is writing something else, a mirror. A story about power. A story about betrayal. A story about people who believe they are untouchable, until the people around them stop obeying. The title, Betrayal in the City. And the irony is almost perfect. Boss is preparing to sit inside a room and watch a story about his own world. He just doesn't realize it yet. But Jusper isn't the only person with a plan. Boss is becoming increasingly unstable. Mulili is protecting himself. Tumbo is manipulating the system for his own benefit. Jere and Mosese are caught between obedience and resistance. Everyone is playing a game. And Boss still believes he is the one holding all the cards. He's wrong. Because the most dangerous mistake a ruler can make is believing that the people around him are loyal, when they are actually just waiting for an opportunity. Soon, Boss will walk into his own palace. He will watch the prisoners rehearse a play. He will even decide to participate. And then, he will make one decision that changes everything. He will give the actors access to real guns. He thinks he's helping the performance. He doesn't realize he is putting the weapons of his own downfall into the hands of the people who want him gone. And when the curtain rises, the play will stop being a performance. It will become a rebellion. Boss has spent years controlling Kafira. Now, he walks into a theater. He expects a performance. Something harmless. Something entertaining. Instead, he's about to watch his own world being exposed in front of him. The prisoners have been rehearsing a play. The government believes it is simply entertainment. But beneath the costumes, beneath the dialogue, something else is happening. A plan is taking shape. Think about the irony. Boss has spent years controlling information. Now he's sitting in an audience, watching a story about political corruption. He thinks he's in control. But for once, he doesn't control the script. And that's important, because dictatorships depend heavily on controlling the story people are allowed to tell. But the moment people can tell their own story, the illusion of absolute power begins to crack. Then something changes. The weapons being used for the performance are real. Boss has allowed access to guns. He believes they are part of the production. But the line between theater and reality is disappearing. The actors aren't simply pretending anymore. The performance has become a cover. And suddenly, the audience isn't watching a revolution. They're watching the beginning of one. Boss begins to realize something is wrong. The people around him aren't behaving like actors. The atmosphere has changed. The performance is no longer under his control. And the man who believed he could manipulate everyone is finally trapped inside a situation he cannot control. For years, Boss has made other people afraid. Now, fear has changed direction. And then comes the betrayal we've been waiting for, Mulili. The man who benefited from Boss's regime. The man who appeared loyal. The man who helped protect the system. Now has a choice. Protect Boss or protect himself. And Mulili does what Mulili has always done. He chooses survival. He turns against Boss. The loyal servant becomes the betrayer. And suddenly, the ruler who seemed untouchable is completely exposed. This is the moment the entire story has been building toward. Boss doesn't fall because one heroic person defeats him. He falls because the relationships holding his power together collapse. Fear stops producing obedience. Loyalty becomes self-interest. The people around him stop protecting him. And once that happens, his authority begins to disappear. That's the deeper meaning of the title. Betrayal doesn't simply happen inside Kafira. It is produced by Kafira. When a government teaches people that survival depends on protecting themselves, eventually, everyone starts protecting themselves, even from the person at the top. But there's a darker question. Does removing Boss solve everything? Not necessarily. Because defeating one ruler doesn't automatically repair a broken political culture. The fear, the mistrust, the opportunism, the violence, the betrayal. Those things don't disappear simply because one man falls. And that's what makes Imbuga's story more complicated than a simple good people defeat bad government story. The real problem is the system that taught everyone how to behave this way. Think back to Jusper. He began as a young man grieving his brother. He wanted justice. He wanted answers. But along the way, he entered a world where deception and manipulation became necessary tools. And that creates the final question surrounding his character. When you fight a corrupt system, how do you make sure the system doesn't change you? Because oppression doesn't only hurt people physically. It can change the way they think, the way they trust, the way they respond to power. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's refusing to become like them. And this brings us back to the title. Betrayal in the City. The city isn't simply a location. It's a metaphor for a society where trust is broken down. The government betrays the people. Officials betray one another. Friends become suspicious of friends. People cooperate with oppression because it benefits them. And resistance itself becomes morally complicated. Everyone is trying to survive. And when survival becomes the highest priority, principles become negotiable. Perhaps that's what Francis Imbuga was warning us about. A country doesn't become dangerous only when one person becomes powerful. It becomes dangerous when ordinary people become so afraid that they stop trusting one another. Because once trust disappears, a society becomes easy to control. People stop standing together. They become isolated. They become suspicious. They begin asking, "What can I gain?" instead of "What is right?" And that's when betrayal stops being shocking. It becomes normal. Kafira's greatest tragedy isn't simply that its leaders betrayed the people. It's that the system eventually taught everyone to betray someone else. And that is why betrayal in the city remains so powerful. Because the most frightening question isn't, who is betraying us? It's, what would fear make us willing to betray?